Cool. All right. Well, Marko, we've known each other for a while, probably since back when you were at Goat. But just for the audience, like, can you give a quick high level overview? It doesn't even have to be quick, but a high level overview of your background and kind of where you're at. And yeah,
Sure. Yeah. Maybe I'll start from the end.
nice.
I'm a CTO at a company called Ghost right now. I've been there for about a year and a half now. So focusing on B2B inventory, which is very interesting because it kind of ties into what I was doing before. This business, actually, the previous two company where I was at are clients of my current company. So it's like a little circle there closing. But yeah, it's a very sort of like interesting world of understanding how this inventory moves and how these marketplaces are actually powered. So we're working on connecting buyers and sellers who sell not just on marketplaces but also at like physical stores and different channels. The kind of interesting thing of how that ties back into the other companies is, I was a CTO at Network before that. Before that, I was at Goat, which is where we met a long time ago. Like on the kind of founding team of Goat from day one there, and sort of seeing the evolution of that company. But I always felt like I understood this kind of like tip of the iceberg piece, which is the consumer piece. And I was always very curious about sort of like what happens under that surface. And now I'm digging really deep into that side of things, which has been fascinating. And it's been a year and a half at this company, and I'm still learning completely new things that I had zero idea about every day, which is crazy how kind of complex and interesting this world is. But anyway, through this, I've been basically, involved in startups most of my career, a lot of very kind of high growth startups and kind of getting involved in those stages. I've also had my own startup, which we sold. I've been kind of like in and out of like sort of my own ventures and participating in other startups. And I find that to be kind of like the most interesting sort of phase of a company, because I do love that, fast paced, high impact, wide scope type of work where things go very well, very, very, very right, or terribly wrong. And I've seen both of those, but that's what makes it kind of interesting and exciting.
No, yeah, super interesting. And I feel like I think you've seen large enough scale to have, or I know you've seen kind of like the earliest stages of work and kind of like the much later, like much more mature stages. And so, kind of across at either end of that, like there's different types of people, there's different types of processes that need to be put in place to help get things to market. And it's just two very different paradigms, which I think is related to kind of some of the stuff that you've obviously been posting about recently. And I know like Gen AI, LLMs are like a very, very hot topic right now, but it is interesting to talk about in terms of kind of from a startup perspective, like the go-to-market function, right? So you've talked a little bit about like how AI is helping, honestly, engineers produce code at a much higher velocity. I think a lot of teams are seeing this. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how honestly that's impacting teams now. I think there's some teams that are jumping headfirst into it who might not have they might be so early that the risk isn't so bad, right? Like they can try and test things pretty quickly. But then there's other teams, probably kind of like Ghost, who like can test things, but also need to be thoughtful about what they test, right? So maybe tell us a little bit like about how you're thinking about approaching using generative AI, LLMs, and all that stuff in terms of like getting products to market.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very unique time right now. I've never sort of seen this level of kind of like disruptive change happen in this industry. Like you had waves of mobile and social in the past, and like obviously in the very beginnings of like kind of web and online businesses. But all of those seemed, minus the kind of like internet sort of being birthed, like that was like obviously a seismic event. But I think like since then it seemed very quite linear in terms of progression and changes and how the industry changed, how people within the industry changed. I think we're at this like very, very interesting point right now where things are changing, are going to change at a like very clearly at an exponential pace. And we're already starting to see that. And I think it's very hard for us humans to understand what exponential means.
Yeah,
And it's very hard to perceive. But I think for the first time in my career, I'm actually feeling it. Like I kind of
interesting.
feel this curve just getting steeper on a daily basis because it's so fast and it's so steep that you cannot ignore it, right? And I
Can I
think
ask
that's
you a question about that
yeah.
real quick? Because that's super interesting point. And when you say you feel it, do you feel it from like a tactical perspective, or are you saying you feel it from like, I know it sounds weird, but like, is it more like anxiousness, right? I think a lot of people are feeling anxiousness versus like, does that make sense?
Yeah, very tactical. So I've been
Okay.
kind of like, I pride myself on being an early adopter for most things. Sometimes, that kind of backfires, but I think in this particular case, like paying very close attention to what was going on since the very kind of beginning of, ChatGPT coming out and like, GPT-3 and so on, and like really like seeing where it can all lead, paying attention to it for a while. It's very tactical. Like I'm using these tools on a daily basis. My team's using these tools on a daily basis. I'm talking to a lot of people who are using these tools regularly. And it's more just like seeing how fast the capabilities are progressing and like what is becoming possible. And even like we would start a project, work on something. It's like, that's kind of like whatever. It's not really working. And then like a new model comes out, or like we come up with like a new technique of like using it. And we're like, holy, like that just like all of a sudden it's working,
Yeah.
and I think that is something that was, not that common in the past, right? It was kind of like this is possible and you can push it and you can kind of like tweak it a little bit, but like that's what it is. Whereas now, like though that kind of edge is constantly being pushed out of what is
Yeah.
actually possible, and that kind of like the intelligence capabilities are growing so fast that it's almost like it's hard to keep up. And I think that's where the anxiety is coming from, is that there's just so much going on and there's so many ways of applying this technology and so many ways of thinking about it. And a lot of people don't have the time or don't have the even just like the desire to like pay attention to it, but they feel the anxiety, right? They're like, oh, this is
Yeah.
moving fast. Everyone is saying it's moving fast. Like what is actually going on, right? And I think like that's the kind of the challenging part around all of this is there's a lot of noise, but
Uh-huh.
in that noise, there is a lot of really, really strong signal too. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
how do you discern, how do you extract that signal? And then how do you apply that signal to your day to day or to your planning or to your,
Totally.
where you kind of are today versus where you're going to be in a year in the most productive way. And I think that's where people are struggling. I think that's
Yeah.
becoming the biggest challenge.
That's an interesting point. How much of your experience with your team have you felt like you're setting up the environment for them to be successful with these tools versus actually being able to kind of deploy stuff? And I know you kind of just got done saying like it's obviously helping, but do you feel like it's moving? Because a new model comes out, you obviously have to play with it. I think it's getting a little bit easier to kind of just implement new models, obviously. But in terms of like frameworks, did you spend a lot of time setting up an environment that allowed you to kind of deploy these?
Yeah. So initially, in the very beginning, it was more working with like some very specific people and like kind of trying certain approaches and certain things and seeing what's working, right? And then we saw it's like, oh wow, this is working, right? We're currently at the phase, at least on my team right now, we're at the phase where I'm working very closely with engineering leadership, and we're essentially putting together a curriculum that's going to level everybody up, right? So we want to be at the kind of bleeding edge of kind of adopting AI. And the reason why, and I'm kind of like talking to my team, and they're sick of this, like they're just gonna keep, saying the
No,
same
that's
thing
great.
over and over again. But like I'm telling everybody, it's like this is your opportunity to really like bulletproof your career, not just at this company, but at like your future jobs for the next 5 years. I can promise you that for the next 5 years, we can make you good. Beyond that, who knows what will happen, right?
Yeah.
Like at
Good
least
luck.
the next 5 years, we can help you become incredibly valuable and even like much more valuable than you are today to a company. But it's going to take some effort, and it's going to be a change, and you're going to have to change the way you work. but we will help you and we'll be there along the way. And we will, we're all in this together. We're learning together, right? And we're supporting each other. And if we do that now versus a year from now, it's not going to only set you up individually for the future. It's also going to help the company tremendously. It's going to help us, increase our productivity. It's going to help us be able to do a lot more things in a lot shorter period of time at a higher quality. It's going to benefit everybody. Like, this is one of those things that, like, it's paramount for your own personal career. It's paramount for the company you're at. And just generally, it just makes sense to do this now. And I'm seeing companies that are, like, big and small. They're companies who are early adopters, and they're really pushing the limits here. I should just listen to, like, a really interesting interview on YC with Aaron Levy from Box.
Yeah.
And they're really good listen. And I would encourage everybody to watch that. It's they talk about, like, what are they doing internally to increase adoption of these tools. And their plan is, like, by the end of the year, basically everybody at the company is going to be an AI first engineer, right?
Yeah.
And I think, in my view, every company that has some sense of, like, what is currently going on out there should be doing this, right? Totally. If you're not doing this, you are going to fall behind. And maybe, it's not maybe going to affect your business directly, depending on the industry you're in like the next year. But if you have a team that's not leveled up, and if you have a team that's not actually, like, riding the wave, but a team that's going to get, like, actually, like, wiped out by the wave, it's going to hurt you eventually, right? So totally. I think it's an investment into that future that every company should be doing today.
I would argue that pretty much everyone, even frankly, my dad uses ChatGPT from time to time. So, like, there's, like, every industry and every sort of age group can potentially benefit from it. To that point about Aaron Levy and everyone kind of being an AI engineer, I feel like now we're kind of at a point where, we're not just, people can't just be, like, AI engineers. They need to be engineers who, like, innately use AI. Like, you're going to fall behind if it's not like there's a role for this. It's like everyone should have that baked into their kind of job description, so to speak, right? Yes. It's interesting that you're doing, honestly, you shared probably 2 years ago, shared with me that Notion doc of, like, how to prompt, which is, like, just when things were coming out, is, like, the first actual document of prompting I ever read through. So thank you for that. Would love to see kind of what you're building internally at Ghost too. But one of the things that I had a question on was, what do you think is an uncommon persona that's going to be pulled closer to engineering, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know if it's uncommon, but I see, like, the roles, like, within EPD, kind of engineering, product design, sort of data, technology teams, starting to blend a little bit more. I see engineers in kind of their skill sets moving a lot more towards product type skill sets and understanding, business needs and business problems, and then being able to ideate on solutions and sort of, like, quickly, like, push those out. I think that's, like, one shift. So, like, very product focused engineers, I believe, are very well set up for the future, right? Just, like, sitting down and cranking out code with, like, no context of what you're doing is gone. Like, that's just, like, not, it's, like, zero value in a year, right? I think that, like, that's, like, kind of, like, engineering is moving more towards, like, that side of things. I also see product people and designers kind of, like, moving from just being like, hey, I understand the problems, I'm coming up with, like, these kind of high level solutions or even, like, detailed solutions, but I have zero impact on the implementation or even the prototyping stage of, like, validation of these ideas. I see that, that moving in the other direction as well. And we're also, kind of thinking about, like, how can we empower people on our team on EPD to actually use some of these tools. And, some people are starting to lean into that. And I think that is the future as well. Like, I think it's going to be very difficult for you to say, like, oh, I'm a PM, but, like, I don't really touch any of this stuff. Like, no, it's like, you're a totally. PM. Like, I think the role of the PM and an engineer is, like, eventually going to merge, right? Because at some point, like, the underlying building of that technology is going to be so abstracted away that it really will come down to, like, understanding of the problem and the value, and then, like, the actual, like implementation of it, especially in, like, industries, like, and we're not talking about, deeply technical, let's say, like, you are, like, doing foundational models, or, you're doing some, like, really deep research type stuff. Like, we're talking about companies that are attacking, business problems, or, they're going after like consumers, you're kind of like not reinventing the wheel there. You're just basically using the technology that's out there and then repurposing it for a very specific need, right?
Yeah.
You like for all of those types of businesses, which is the vast majority, right?
Yeah.
You
People are
don't
building
really
like basic CRUD apps, like it's not, that stuff is just going to be so commoditized.
exactly. So I think all of those roles are like kind of slowly going to merge. I think there's going to be still obviously like a lot of value in being like a deeper technical expert, or a deeper product expert, or design expert, or have like be much more data aware. Like all of those things will still exist, but in a different way. I think it's like it's going to be a lot hazier than it is now. But I also see like not only there, and also I'm seeing this like at our company as well, is people from like sales and operations and finance and so on are starting to like see the value in a lot of these tools, right? And can start solving some of their own problems, right? Without necessarily needing like engineers or needing like highly technical people. So I see also like a move towards everybody else kind of being more empowered
Totally.
to actually solve those problems. And maybe they'll solve those problems in a temporary way, and maybe they'll like prototype and learn quickly from it. And then they might involve a technical team to come in and like create something that's like production ready and safe and scalable, et cetera, et cetera. But like that first piece of like being able to like create point solutions is also like super valuable, because it just reduces that cycle and increases the learning speed. And I think those things are, going to be incredibly valuable going forward. And I think companies fundamentally are going to change, like how companies are structured. I think you're going to have, a lot fewer people with a lot more tools and a lot more capabilities, so are going to be able to move a lot faster. I think it's going to remove a lot of the bloat from the companies where you do need to get a lot of grunt work done. You need to do a lot of, you just throw humans at problems that really, can be solved with technology. And I think as companies sort of evolve, and as new companies that are starting with this, and kind of as, the smart one starting with this.
It's easier to start though, as like from zero, right? And then kind of build these first principles from the ground up. But if you're like a company, even if like the size of Ghost, right? Like it's not that easy to kind of turn the ship and get everyone to like, I mean, you're not like a Box size company, right? Like Box is huge. To shift everyone into like AI engineers is like it takes the CEO being like, this is what we need to do. And everyone kind of needs to follow suit. But yeah, anyways, my point being, it's like, if you're going 0 to 1, that's a little different. There's not as much risk there.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think like you also like start thinking about, efficiencies very early on, and start like saying like, can I utilize technology for this versus people? And, for most small companies, cash is always a challenge. So like you're always going to look for like cheaper, faster, more effective solutions. So I think like, we're going to start seeing these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people companies reach these like huge scales. They used to need a team of 100 to get to. I think we're going to start seeing those over the coming years, and those are going to become the norm. And then like, if you are one of these incumbents and you're not adapting, you will get absolutely obliterated, right?
Yeah.
Because you just, there's, at some
Too
point,
easy.
like being able to do stuff 10 times cheaper is just going to be like a huge competitive advantage. And even if you have relationships, and even if you have distribution and so on, like if you're not moving towards that model, like at some point the market's going to turn, right? So
yeah, totally.
It's going to be like a really interesting few years for sure to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it makes sense to kind of shift your team's mindset towards producing work in this way, and that's advantageous for them in the long run as well. I think we're seeing like a lot of this work kind of move from like needing multiple nodes of people to like, a single nodes of people being like, you kind of, to your point, like teams of 5 or 6 people can build what 100 people built, 10 years ago, right? So yeah, it's really interesting to see. And I think that's like the one thing that I think, kind of going back to kind of the uncommon persona, it is interesting to see now, like, salespeople can theoretically spin up, visualizations for themselves, right? Like if there's data available, like they can go in to some sort of, interface that a company's created and say like, make me a dashboard that tells me how much I've sold this month, or, what's the number of net new customers that we have over the last like 6 months, blah, blah, blah. Right. And it's a much different experience for all these, like every single profile of person within an organization, I think, than it was even like honestly a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I have this like kind of theory around that, as if you think about all these tools that are coming out and, these like fast prototyping tools and like build tools, there's like a bunch of them out there where you
Like
can just kind of go and
Superbase and
prompt it. Sorry.
Versal. It was Superbase and Vercel and like a bunch of
Yeah.
these. Like,
Yeah.
even I can use that
Lovable,
stuff.
like
Yeah.
all of these kinds of tools that basically you can just kind of go and prompt it to like create something for you. And it may not be perfect, but it's only going to get better. And I think that we're kind of entering this stage of like highly personalized software. I think if you think about like where we've been, especially with SaaS, it's kind of like this like behemoth of a solution that covers every possible use case. And because of that, it's kind of clunky and it requires a lot of configuration and a lot of like you need to adapt it. Like think of Salesforce, right? Like you need like consultants going in for like 6 months to just like adapt it to your, needs.
Yeah.
And then it's still clunky and you still have a bunch of stuff you never use. And, so it's like, I think that was kind of like the old model. I think what we're going to start seeing is kind of like, is much more of, hey, this is a need I have. Can I have a solution that just solves that need? Or maybe a smaller group of needs. And right now that is also very clunky, but I think that's going to get a lot better. So I think you're going to start having a lot more kind of tailored solutions across businesses that are just going to solve their problems in a perfect way. And you're probably going to see companies doing that for them, but then also you'll see that internally people being able to, as you said, like create their own solutions. Like, hey, I need this like dashboard, and there might be this like huge dashboard that does everything for me, but I need this very specific thing that I actually just use every day. And maybe it's just me, and maybe me and my team are using this and nobody else cares, right? Can I spin that up myself and be able to like make sure that it's correct and I can support it and it's easy to manage and just keep using that, right? And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. And I think that's exciting because software, especially on the business side, like, business software has like, I don't know how many people go and say like, I love my CRM, like, I love my ERP. Like that's not, and I hear that every day. People are like, why are we like, what is this thing? It's like so clunky. There's so much stuff. Like, I don't know how to find things. And it's like, you can kind of like move away from that. And I think we're moving into an era where, because code will essentially become free. So like when you can execute on any kind of a problem and create a solution quickly, changes the game completely. Yeah. And that's
I know.
Exciting.
I kind of feel like it's aesthetic opinion will matter a lot more across every domain. I kind of think even in the software, I've had this thought in the past, but like it feels like there should be a space where you have sort of like your data available in like a structured, semi-structured sort of way in a database, and then you can just apply a skin to it, right? Like more or less. I think that's like a space that we'll end up getting to, especially like SaaS, for example. I think the challenging part where I don't quite, and maybe you have an opinion on this, which I'd love to get your opinion, but it's the challenging part to me is Salesforce has been around for a really long time. People hate it. They love to hate it in a lot of ways, but there are some advantages to sort of like a unified sort of experience for the enterprise or for companies and for transferability, right? So as an individual going from one company to another, there's a lot of new things and processes that take place. Being able to walk into a new Salesforce instance, like the data is a little different, but like you're more or less interacting with the exact same thing. I mean, do you think that that's going to matter that much, that transferability, or is that like?
Yes, but at a different level. So I think the key thing here is consistency and like accuracy of that data. So I think that what is happening and what will increasingly start happening specifically with data teams is they're going to start focusing on that semantic layer on like, how do we create a way for people to query this data in a consistent way so that when you ask the same question twice, you don't get two different answers. And I think it's that semantic translation layer that's going to be absolutely key. And that's still going to require quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of nuance to get right. Obviously, over time, like even that sort of like creating that layer of like, actually making meaning out of the data that you have will get more and more automated. But like once you have that, then you can build anything you want on top of that. And I think like when it comes to like, familiarity with like the UX side of things, I think people are pretty adaptable. And I think there's also like best practices, and when you go into like consumer kind of grade software that's highly usable, it just feels natural, right? And I think like all of those best practices will become standard in terms of like building these tools. And even if you're building them yourself, it's like the system you're using to build will follow those practices, and you can encode them. And that's the beauty of it. Like you can just like encode all of these like best practices and make sure that like whatever is spit out is actually following those. And like if you think about the cycle of like being able to put something out, test it very quickly, provide very quick feedback, immediately get a better version. So like, yeah, that's annoying. Like, what is this thing? And then like 5 minutes later, it's fixed. That's like, to people that like today, that's mind blowing. In the future, there's going to be like, of course, like this thing doesn't make sense. Like, let's fix it. And I want to fix in 2 minutes. Right. And I want it to be better and kind of more intuitive. Like, I think there's like, that's what it's like talking about like exponential changes. Like the fact that like today, the cycle, this iteration takes so long between like putting something out there, learning from it, kind of like testing out alternative solutions, and then you actually putting something like, it takes, at best days, usually weeks or months, right? Imagine that happening in minutes, right? So like that, that's a complete shift in like what software looks like and how you use it. So I think like that will become a reality, right? Because like, you just get like, when you have to look at these things at the limit, right? When like writing code and execution trends towards zero cost and like infinite speed, right? Those are the things that can happen almost in like instantaneously. And that just really changes. And we're kind of still, that's why people are still thinking with these like limits in place. But like when you remove all those limits, you're like, oh, wow, that completely changes how this whole industry works. Like how people operate on a daily basis, right? And I think that kind of fluidity that we're not used to, because right now it's so clunky. It's like,
totally.
I have this.
It's still clunky. Lots of things are clunky still. And it's getting so much better every like month. Is like, it's crazy improvements. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but I think that is like a shift that when people are like in the middle of it and using it, it'd be like, of course, this feels so natural. This is how it should be, right? It's kind of like moving from like a command line interface to like a GUI. It was like, of course, we want things to be visual versus like me remembering like a bunch of commands and typing them in. Like, and then when you switch into this, like the system is constantly adapting to you and like presenting things to you in the way that make the most sense in the moment. You're gonna be like, of course, that makes sense, right? But and it's going to trend towards kind of like, I think everything kind of trends towards like the natural state of things. Like if you think about two humans interacting, right? Like people are constantly adapting to each other's mood and speed and, like tone of voice and like topics that you discuss, like all those things like are changing constantly. You don't have that conversation when it comes to software. It's like, here you go, use it. You're like, oh, that's, I have a problem here. It's like, too bad. It's going to take some time, right? But like, imagine having that conversation with like a system where it's like adapting in real time. Like that's where we're going to get to, because that's what we're used to as humans. Like we want, I don't want to tell you something, and then you're like 6 months later, you come back and be like, oh yeah, let me react to that. You want people,
you want some level of like homeostasis, right? Like you don't like it, you want to move towards kind of like stability. So I think like these systems can't just be, you can do whatever you want. Like that's actually not going to work. I think for most people is we like do want some constraints, which those constraints make it hard to get out of our current thinking and into a mindset of like, here's this new paradigm where we can actually like code 10x faster. Like it's hard for engineers to kind of get out of the normal sprint cycles in their heads, because they're thinking like, well, this is how I know to do this thing. If I go try this other kind of like AI engineering framework, which like I know can get me 80% of the way there, am I going to spend, 10 hours working on that and then come to the conclusion that if I had just done it the way I was doing it before, those 10 hours would have gotten me a completed version, if that makes sense, right? And I think there's this like tension there with AI right now where it's like, it is moving really fast. It does produce a lot of like really incredible stuff, but I think like in a lot of cases, it is really only getting us kind of like 80% of the way there, but that could change like that too, right? That was a whole lot of stuff all at once, but I totally hear you on this. It's interesting because I think you talked a little bit about some of the like newer tools available, maybe just like really practically speaking, for someone who wants to kind of figure this stuff out, like you had such a great document you shared with me, obviously a long time ago, about like how to prompt. Like, what are some fun tools to play around with to learn more about how to leverage Gen AI, or like how to even go 0 to 1 on an application? Anything that like you think people should play around with to learn more about kind of like this new paradigm?
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on the space, like specifically
Sure.
around software engineering.
Yes.
What we are honing on, like within our team, and we're kind of playing around with what I've been playing around with and seeing a lot of like really interesting things come out of are uh, like 3 or 4 tools. So we were like super early adopters on GitHub Copilot. I think GitHub Copilot in general and like GitHub AI products are maybe not always going to be cutting edge. Like they're not, they were when they came out, like then, other things come out and like kind of surpass them, but like they're just consistent. And like, I'm pretty confident that like they'll be like one of the key players going forward, and they're constantly putting out new stuff. So, we've been like using Copilot as like a code completion tool first. Then it put out the kind of agentic, aspect of it too, which is, maybe not as good as like some of the other things like the Vercel one or, some of the other things, but like it is, it's a tool that you kind of used to using, and you don't have to be switching from that to something else all the time, right?
There's an overlap.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's almost like I don't necessarily want like thrash in a team. Like every week we use a new tool and like you need to learn how to use it. It's like, let's pick a couple of like really core tools that we know are going to be consistently like at the top, in the top 1, 2, 3, and just stick with those, because the difference between like using the hottest thing in the moment versus using something that's like slightly below is like negligible. But the price of constant switching is pretty high, right?
Yeah.
So I think like those tools are really good, and GitHub keeps putting out new things. So for example, actually yesterday this happened. We just got admitted into like the Copilot review product. We've actually like tested probably at least 3, if not more, like a code review, a PR review products. And they're all kind of like, yeah, like the team, like we're going to put it out there. We give it to the team like, hey, is this creating value? Should we? And it was like, nobody was ever like, yes, this is the most amazing thing. Like, let's keep it. So I've been like secretly just waiting for GitHub to release their version. So we just got access to their preview yesterday. So we can actually test it out. I have a feeling that that's the one that's going to stick probably. And it just kind of speeds up the PR reviews, and you get some feedback, and like looks at vulnerabilities, and you can just kind of like, it just like speeds up the cycle of pushing the code out. So that's something I'm really excited about. They're constantly putting out, like they have like a CLI tool. I've been actually using another one called Warp, which is really interesting. It's like it's a terminal product, but it's like very heavily Gen AI first. Really good. Really good.
Nice.
I've like stopped remembering, how to do things in command. I just like write it out in English.
Natural language. Yeah.
It's so accurate and it's so good. And it does things that like, I was like, oh man, how do I like pipe this here and extract this text and put it there? I'm just like, I'm not going to remember the syntax. Like, just tell me what it is. And it does it, right? And it's like, it's incredible. So like, that's another tool that like we've been kind of testing and using internally, and I've been using very heavily. We've been playing around a lot with Klein. So Klein is like another agentic framework, and it has like a Visual Code plugin. So you can use it within Visual Code. Getting some like really good, the team is really liking it and using it quite heavily, getting some like really interesting results from there. Anecdotally, one of our QA engineers was kind of playing around with it and writing some end-to-end tests, and shared one day, it was like, wow, this is incredible. Like I thought I was going to do 1 test today, and this thing just helped me do 10. I was like, okay, that's 10x right there. Maybe it's like 1 data point.
Literally, yeah.
Hopefully that's like the pattern, right? And so we've been playing around a lot with that. And then obviously like a lot of people have been using Cursor. So like we were kind of like very early in on Cursor too. Again, like some of these there's a lot of overlap, like Cursor, Klein, parts of like GitHub Copilot are kind of like overlapping. So like different people are using different tools. And we're just kind of experimenting to see like what sticks. But what we're finding, and I think like this is kind of like the next evolution of this, is like one thing is like you kind of mess around with it, play with it, like see how it works, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing is like having a really good, consistent set of kind of like templates and approaches to like how to use these tools in the most effective way. And that's kind of like the next phase of what we're doing, which is really coming up with like a set of best practices, and support and community around the kind of how we use these tools, like opportunities to play around, opportunities to hack, opportunities to learn, to teach, and so on. So we can kind of all keep, keep each other sort of at the top of the game. And as we kind of develop these like best practices and we learn like what is actually truly working and what's like really having a big impact, making sure that we are solidifying that as like the baseline, right? So it's like, once we find out that like this particular approach works, everybody has to be at least using that, and then building on top of it, right? And I think like that's kind of, you slowly start like building up the team, and that's how you go from, increasing your productivity by then 10-20% to eventually like 10xing or 100xing an engineer, which is going to happen over the next, couple of years or few years. And I think like you just kind of have to keep building upon on those skill sets. And it's not like just go in and play with it. There are ways of like any tool, you need to be very proficient at using it. We want to like make sure that our team becomes like the most proficient, in the industry at using these tools. And that's kind of like the goal of what we're trying to do. And
are you
to kind of to close that thought, it comes down to like not just sort of, hey, here's a tool, let's like all use it. It comes down to like hiring people who are either proficient in these tools or highly curious and want to lean in.
Yeah.
Right? So like,
I think the curious thing right now is particularly important because it's just not enough time for someone to have been insanely proficient sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think like our hiring is going to change, or like JDs are going to change, our career ladders are changing as a part of this, like our review cycles are changing. Like this is becoming a core skill that we are not only like expecting people to be interested in, but we're expecting people to become extremely proficient in. And it's going to be one of the key elements of evaluating their performance, right?
Yeah.
And we want people to lean into that, because this is, as I said, like it may seem like it's interesting, but I in 6 to 12 months it's going to become like, if you don't have these skills, you're going to be unemployable.
Totally.
And I see like interviews coming up for people in this space of like, tell me how you've like 10x yourself. This is maybe not today, but like how have you increased your productivity by like 30 to 50% today? But like, how have you 10x yourself? And I think the interviews are going to be, like, let's say a technical coding interview is not going to be so much like sit down and like write this out. It's like, I'm going to give you a problem and I'm going to give you an hour, and you're going to create like a whole system around it, and you're going to deploy it and you're going to run it. And I want to see you using these tools in the most effective way. Right.
Yeah.
I think like that's going to become like almost like a core, skill that you need to have, because I don't want to bring you into the team if you're going to be going at like 1x the speed when the rest of the team is going at 5, right? Like there's zero like sense in doing that. So I think like for engineers who want to stay relevant, you need to show that you're doing this, because me isn't like, if I'm employing you and I'm paying you money, I want you to be doing, creating as much value as you possibly can. Totally. I don't want you to be like, working with, stone tools when you can be using, computers, right? So it's like, it's kind of like, I think that's the mentality that's going to become very prevalent, especially on the hiring side, that I think is going to change the game. And I think that's why I was saying earlier, like people need to be ready for that today.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
today.
Totally agree with you. Yeah. That was great, by the way. I feel like, to your point, I think the people who run towards the ambiguity right now are going to have a lot of success, right? You'll find yourself in some good positions, because honestly, a lot of this stuff is not set in stone. And it'll be interesting to kind of get your feedback in like a year from now, once you've implemented kind of this sort of like templated version of like how to use these new tools within your organization, because I'm guessing along that value chain, there's going to be changes, right? There will be things that like today are what things that Marko thinks are potentially the best way to approach this particular problem, but that can change like in 6 months, right? So it'll be interesting to kind of hear in 6 months to a year from now how like that whole thing evolves, because I think it'll be really fun.
I think tactically it's always going to evolve, and things are going to change, and like the tools and the implementation is going to change. I mean, even like in the last like few days, Claude releases like 3.7 with this like coding tool, and people are going crazy about it, right? And it's like that kind of stuff is going to keep happening, and that's great. Like that's what I'm saying about the exponential curve. It's just like these tools are coming out, everyone's like, what? Like this is incredible, right?
So fun.
And it's going to keep happening. And I think like the kind of that's the tactical level is going to continuously be evolving. I think like kind of higher level, like more strategic thinking, it's like you just have to be in it. And you just have
Yeah.
to be like learning, and you just have to be on the edge, and you have to be like figuring out how to adopt, this change into like your personal career and into your teams. And I think that to me is going to be the most important thing. And I kind of like thinking about this, like, let's say from like a year from now, we're interviewing for like an engineering manager position, right? The first question I'm going to ask him is, how have you helped your team level up in terms of AI? That's the number one question I'm going to ask, right?
It's
I'm
a
not going to be like,
great question.
tell me about, like your people management skills and like, like all of that is important, obviously. Like that's like, that's foundational. You have to have all those skills. But like, to me, if you haven't done anything in this space, it's like, you're clearly not pushing the boundaries and you're going to become irrelevant very quickly. So that to me is like, kind of like, if I was in the position of like preparing for an interview a year from now as like in engineering leadership, or even as an engineer, like that would be like, how do I answer that question in the most like impactful way, so that that person who's talking to me be like, oh, we bring this person on, everyone's going to benefit, right?
Totally.
And like, I think the shift that needs to change.
No, I totally agree with you. Well, this was honestly fantastic. So I appreciate all your time. And I don't know if you want to leave anyone with final thoughts on anything, but I appreciate the time. This is really great.
Yeah. Thank you for the time. I love talking about this stuff because it's so top of mind.
It's so fun.
And it's such a unique period we're living through. And this is, not, it's like things are going to shift, and then we're going to look back and be like, yeah, of course, like this is, but right now it's like this kind of inflection point that I find always fascinating. I love this stuff.
Totally.
If anything, I would leave people with is just like, stay curious and stay like really interested in what's going on. And I believe that if you lean into this, you can benefit from it personally in terms of your career much more than any other wave that's happened before, but it can also destroy you. So like it's a sharp edge that you need to be on the right side of.
Yeah.
And if you are, I foresee like companies hiring engineers and paying them 3 to 5 times more in the future, because they'll be
I
creating
agree. I totally
20
agree.
times more value, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to be fewer of those people, right? So like, you need to be one of those people who are going to go in and get paid a lot more money to do things in a new way. And like, if you're on that side of the history, like you're gonna look back and be like, this was the best thing that's ever happened. If you're not, you might be growing vegetables,
Yeah. It's not a bad job.
Deep woods, and that's okay too. That's totally fine. Like, it doesn't mean that one thing is better. It's just
Totally.
you got to pick your path.
Totally. I love it. Well, this is awesome, Marko. We'll let you get back to it, and thank you again for making time.
Awesome. Thanks, Stuart.
Okay.
Talk soon.